Welcome everybody to Family Mediation Week. We're here this afternoon to talk about kinship care and mediation. Today we're going to focus on a project that we've been running as Family Solutions, which involves mediating with kinship care families. This project is funded by Foundations, which is a relatively newly formed body, which was an amalgamation between the Early Invention Foundation and What Works for Children in Social Care. The project has been evaluated by Quorum and we've been running for approximately 16 months. You can just move to the next slide, Helen. So we are Helen and Claire from Family Solutions. We're down on the South Coast. And if you can just move on. We started in 2007 and we're a relatively large practice. We've got 6 offices across Hampshire and we receive about 1,000 referrals a year, which leads to 600 families per year being mediated. We receive those referrals from social services, the court, CAFCAS, lawyers and other local agencies. We are a legal aid practice and obviously we offer the voucher scheme as well. We are all members of the Family Mediation Council and we like to promote a constructive approach to resolving issues.
So just quickly, just to let you know what we're planning to cover today. We haven't got much time, inevitably, but we will do our best to get through all the details of the project. So just briefly, we're going to just have a quick look at family mediation. I know lots of you watching are mediators already, but I also am aware that there will be some professionals who are watching who are not. So we're just going to run quickly through what family mediation is, the mediation process and the benefits of mediation. And then we're going to look specifically at the Kinship Care Mediation Project, how we developed it. And then we're going to look at what we call Mediation Plus. So that is where we do standard mediation, but we also add in some extra stuff around communication, conflict management, so it sort of goes, it's different from the standard mediation process, which is partly why we wanted to tell you about it, the standard process initially. Then we'll look at the participant's journey. We'll have a quick chat about the theory of change and the logic model and the feasibility study, and then we will work on, I explain how to refer, which is very simple process. And then there should be 5 or 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A. So hopefully plenty of time to answer any questions that you've got, but they are all going to be saved to the end. Okay, Claire.
So what is family mediation? So in summary, mediation is voluntary, so no one can make you do it. The mediator is neutral, so we're not there to take sides, we're not judgmental, we are there to facilitate and aid. It is confidential. Everything that is said in mediation is private and confidential. And that's particularly important when we come on to the kinship mediation, because some of the people who have been involved in court proceedings, especially care proceedings, are exceptionally fragile about that confidentiality. Obviously, the confidentiality does not prevent safeguarding issues being reported. That is still our high benchmark, but it does mean that people can talk openly and honestly about how they're feeling. The benefit of, who is mediation? Who is family mediation for? So normally when we think of mediation, we think of separating couples. So we think about divorce or separating parents. We think about finances and we think about children. But today we're also going to be talking about that wider spectrum. So often when we talk about mediation, typically we talk about, as I say, separating families. We also talk about grandparents who may wish to see their grandchildren. We might talk about blended families, but today we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about when children can't stay with their biological parents. So moving on. So the normal process is that the clients will have their individual appointments, their MIAM. Now, these appointments are never going to be on the same day, so they will always be on a separate day. They won't know when their appointments are, the other person's appointments are, and they will have time to reflect before they come into a joint session. The mediation sessions are at times and dates that suit everybody. Normally, according to the legal aid authorities stats, there's about 2 to 3 joint mediation sessions. Some people come for 1, some people stay for 10, but that's just an average. Mediation can be stopped by either party or both of them at any time, and it can of course also be stopped by the mediator themselves. And of course, mediation doesn't have to be in the same room. There's often mediation in separate spaces, which make people feel safer. When we come on to the kinship care, we're just going to talk about how that's changed slightly, and also the fact that sometimes there are more than 2 people having a MIAM. So you might have grandparents, so that's 2 people who would have separate MIAMs, plus 2 parents who would also have separate MIAMs. So everybody would have their own MIAMs to make sure that it's safe. We wouldn't do just because they're a couple. So for example, if there was special guardians who are husband and wife, we wouldn't do them together. Although they often want to, we would do them separately so that they would have separate spaces. So moving on, just very briefly, what are the benefits? So the benefits of mediation are the individual is in control. So they can decide what they want to talk about. They can find their own solutions. Again, as we said earlier, it's confidential, so everybody can speak openly and freely. It does save money. It is cheaper. Obviously, there is legal aid available still, and there is the voucher scheme, which we now know has been extended to March 26. But even if people are paying privately, it is still cheaper than going to court. It is less stressful. It avoids time and stress of the long process. Mediation can usually be done in a much more concertinaed fashion. It is tailor-made, so every mediation is unique, the same as every family is unique. So we can talk about what suits them and how that mediation would take place. It can just be for updating existing agreements. So you could come back every year and talk about what's going to happen in the next academic year, for example, or it can be at the time of separation for the future. It is less conflict, and therefore it is, of course, much better for children and much better for individuals involved in the mediation process. So moving forward.
Okay, so just going to think now about kinship care mediation and give you some more information about the project itself. So first of all, why did we do it? Well, largely because we initially worked with 50 families who were in the child protection process, and we did this for foundations with their support, and it was under the Practice in Need of Evidence programme. So we did that. We used the PINE programme. Foundations were hugely supportive in helping us work out how to evaluate that sort of part of the programme and looking at how to develop a sort of logic model and what have you. So after we'd done that, we worked out that from the cohort of the 50 families that we worked with, the people who were most likely to attend and make agreements in mediation were families where there was a kinship carer involved. So obviously lots of you will know this, so I'm sorry if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but kinship carer is when a child lives with a relative or friend who isn't their parent. So just thinking about what worked best for the existing families and how we were then going to move it forward. So we decided that we would work with them, and we also were aware that kinship care families do face significant and unique challenges. So we wanted to take that on board as well. We felt they were a cohort that really needed some extra support. And partly, again, because kinship carers and biological parents usually have to keep working together post-order because they need to, carers often need to make contact arrangements when the biological parent's going to see their children. And balancing for the carer, trying to balance obviously the understandable wish of the biological parent to see their children, balanced against the sort of kinship carer's concerns about neglect or substance abuse, and also the local authorities' concerns, which the carer has to take into account, really does make it extremely difficult, makes it hugely conflicted and really tough. Obviously, of course, children in kinship care can have extra issues around their physical needs, mental health issues, and behavioural challenges. So again, that adds to the pressure on the carer. And of course, the biological parent might have ongoing issues around with some mental health issues that might impact their ability to care for the child or to spend time with the child, and may still be experiencing substance abuse. So lots of really good reasons why we wanted to focus on kinship care. And we've got a really nice video now, which I hope I really like, which demonstrates why it is really tough being in the kinship care family and being the kinship carer. And this is from an organisation which lots of you will have heard of called Kinship. It's a really fabulous video. So we'll just play that now.
You can't really do much about the family you're born into. You know, like if your dad runs off before you can remember him and it rips your mum to bits and she spins out on a bender drinking and taking other stuff and forgets to leave the key under the brick or put food in the fridge or stop shouting at 2 in the morning on a school night. You can't do much about any of that. About your mum unravelling and that. Then one day a social worker comes and takes you away for your own safety. But you never said you didn't feel safe and you'd promised to take care of her and now you've let her down. And anyway, the social worker, they don't even know where they're going to take you. They just put you in the car and drive you away from your mum. With me anyway, they thought, let's give her auntie a whirl. They roll up to her front door and explain the mess. She looks at me and I get the feeling that she don't know if she can do it, but thinks that if she says no now, if she says I can't fit her into my house, into my life and my other kids' lives, then the social worker will take me away for good. She won't see me again. She gets that idea anyway, and as well, I suppose she knows that right then and there, she's all I've really got. I'm still in my pyjamas and don't have a toothbrush or my school uniform, but she takes me in and wraps me up. The social worker goes and now she's got a kid sat there in the kitchen and there's nothing she can do about it. I'm a lot to take on. I've got to admit I wasn't the easiest. What with worrying that my mum doesn't love me, what with thinking about her and my dad all the time and getting that hole in my middle that won't go away unless I bounce off the walls and lash out and explode and tie myself up in hundreds of knots. And all the time tangling my auntie up too, pulling on her until she falls apart. All she can do is kick me out, which she can't because she loves me and that. She gives up her job, she gets a loan, she explains to her kids why she's on a short fuse, she watches other perfect families going on holiday, she does visits with my mum who doesn't always turn up, she washes my socks and she sorts out going to court and the legal orders, even though legal orders are pretty stressful, seeing as if she makes a mistake on them, they would screw up my entire life forever in that. She's exhausted, she's done in, and there's nothing more she can do. Except one night, when everyone else was watching telly, we took out her phone and we started to look. And looking was doing something. Looking led to chatting, to getting support, to getting advice, to seeing and hearing that what she was doing, other people were doing too. That it was something to be proud of. That she was a kinship carer. And it helped her slowly put herself back together and roll herself back up and have the energy to keep loving someone like me. And that love, well, it's probably saved my life. And that's not nothing, is it? Like I said, you can't do much about the family you're born into, but I'm glad I was born into one that had my auntie in it.
So that little video gives us an idea of what a kinship carer might be. So who can be a kinship carer? It can be anyone in your family. It could be any friends. It's someone who's known to you, is basically the idea behind kinship care. It can be at any stage. So it could be very early on. It could come much later. You might be a tiny little child when you go into kinship care. You might be a teenager. You might have very limited contact with your parents when you go into kinship care. You might have quite substantial contact still with your parents. So there is an awful lot of different experiences when people go into kinship care. So if we move on. So the different types of kinship care. as I say, they all basically drill down to the same. They come back to the fact that they are somebody who you know, either a family member or a friend of the family, who are prepared, and Children's Services, local authority, are prepared to trust a child with. So it can be an informal kinship care arrangement. It can be foster care. There can be special guardianship orders, which is probably the most common and the most well known. Often it can be under a child arrangements order. So that's often when dad hasn't been involved and then steps up, or it could be when it's done privately and the local authority haven't got involved and therefore the special guardianship isn't looked at. Adoption by relatives, private fostering, or residence with a connected person under a care order tends to be short-term placements, normally about 16 weeks. It enables the local authority to place a child with somebody that they know quickly in important situations. So it can be anything. It doesn't really affect the mediation that we provide. It's good for us to know how they get there and what kind of orders they've got and why they get there and how they've managed to make those decisions. It also tells us whether or not the child was a cared for child by the local authority, which is really important because more resources are available for families who've had a cared for child than for people who might have gone down the child arrangements order in a private arrangement, and then there'll be a lot less facilities or entitlement around that child. So it's important for us to know, but it doesn't really change the mediation that we provide. So moving on, what do we do? So we provide free family mediation awareness training for 70 professionals. Now, the idea behind this is we knew that everybody knew a little bit about mediation, but we were worried that predominantly people who were going to be referring wouldn't know enough. So we took the view that we would work with professionals to try and explain to them a little bit of a mediation awareness, and then a little bit about what we thought kinship carers might appreciate. Now, the benefit was we started out with the plan of seeing 70 professionals and giving this awareness to them. We ended up with 280 professionals engaging, which was fantastic. And they were from Hampshire County Council, Southampton City Council, Portsmouth City Council and the Isle of Wight. So it was an amazing start that so many people were open to kinship mediation and wanted to be involved. The second half of the programme was then providing the specialist mediation for 20 kinship care families. So this wasn't the 20 families coming from MIAMS, this was 20 families actually undertaking the mediation. We knew, because we knew from the stats that we collected from the Legal Aid Authority, how many people normally go to a MIAM and then don't proceed to mediation. We scaled that up because we were aware from the work that we did under PINE, which Helen was talking about earlier when we looked at the care proceedings generally, that this cohort struggled a little bit in committing, and therefore we knew that instead of the normal 60-40 ratio that you would expect going into mediation, so 60% going into mediation, we took a view that we would turn that the other way around and say only 40% of people who were either referred or had a MIAM would probably come into mediation. We have actually found anecdotally that it's actually lower than that, but that's where we started. We also started with the research clearly indicating that children benefit from having their voices heard. So we had to be really aware when we were doing this that we didn't want to be yet another professional. And if the children had seen too many professionals in their journey through to whatever placement they were in, then we were not going to offer a child consultation. But where it was appropriate that we factored this in at session 2, which we will come on to. So we ended up in the end doing, I think we're on about 80 odd MIAMs compared to the 20 families, and we're nearly at the 20 families actually have undertaken the mediations. So if we can go forward.
But we do still have room for more, so please keep referring. So yeah, just to give you a bit of the background about what we were thinking about, that we wanted to provide the mediation for 20 families, but we wanted to go a little bit further, and we wanted to look at their communication and conflict management skills on an ongoing basis. So what we knew, obviously, is that mediation is successful in resolving disputes in over 70% of cases. Obviously, that's from the Family Mediation Council Survey 2019. So brilliant, and a hugely successful at producing and resolving conflict. But that research suggests that while mediation and court-based sort of systems were good at dispute resolution, the negotiation process by itself had proved disappointing in resolving underlying conflicts or significantly improving communication. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to avoid people coming back in that loop, which is you facilitate the discussion, you help them resolve the issue, and then 2 years later they're back into mediation, or they're back into the court process, or they're back with lawyers again, and they are stuck in that loop of conflict because they can't get themselves out of it. So when we first started thinking like this many years ago, I think it was 2014, around 2014, we got some funding from the Department for Work and Pensions around the reducing parental conflict program. So that was with the idea that we would test out some of these techniques and see if it made any difference. So we called this Changing Lives, and we ran the Changing Lives project for 2 years, and we offered 4 sessions, which was a mixture of mediation, but also using these sort of communication and conflict management skills that we wanted to teach people. Our local courts, which really are largely, aren't they, Claire? Portsmouth and Southampton, they embraced the project, especially Portsmouth. They were amazing, and they referred loads of people in. And I think it was a real success in terms of keeping people out of court, hopefully on an ongoing basis. And I've just put a little bit of some of the feedback. So District Judge Ackroyd, who was head of family at the time at Portsmouth, said that Changing Lives project was estimated to have saved over 1 month of family court time. So that's one district judge over a 12-month period. And he said it was an indispensable and vital tool available to us. It is important to emphasise just how successful it's been. So it's really good, and really positive feedback from CAFCAS as well. So everyone very positive about it. But of course, inevitably, the money runs out. The purpose of the funding was to look at what works and what doesn't, not to carry on funding the project going forward. So obviously that changed, and then we lost the funding. But we did feel convinced that the extra tools that we were giving people were useful and were going to make a difference. So what we then decided is that we would do what we called specialist kinship care mediation. So we applied for funding from foundations. So after the PINE process, which we've gone through, we then applied for some funding, which they very kindly granted us to do this sort of specialist kinship care mediation. And what that involved was your standard mediation, but also providing families with additional support in the impact of conflicts, on the impact of conflict on children, looking at trauma, the impact on the brain, looking at ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, where that was appropriate to discuss with the families, looking at how they might communicate and manage conflict going forward, so outside of the mediation room, to try and stop them in this loop of coming back. And we also thought we would work with them around some parenting skills and techniques, so that if they were parenting very inconsistently, that we could try and sort of bring them together a little bit. So that was our idea. That's what we decided to do. And that's kind of what we've been running. And everybody, all the mediators are trained in all these additional tools. We use the communication and conflict management tools from a program, well evidence-based and research called Prepare Enrich. So we use that. The parenting skills and techniques are taken from various parenting programs that we've all trained in. So we've had lots of extra training, but the mediation process is still exactly the same. We just add in the extra bits and pieces, and we do that at our discretion. We don't have to cover the same thing every time, and we won't always include everything, but it's whatever works best for the family and how we think it will help them the most.
So under the funding, the participant's journey is very similar to in a normal mediation. So we would receive the referral, either from the local authority or on behalf of a kinship carer or a parent. And we would invite anybody involved with that child to a MIAM. So that could be, as I said earlier, the caregivers. So that might be a husband and wife team, or it could just be an individual. It could be both biological parents if they wish to come. It can be also other parties, because often you end up with a blended family where you might have two children with different dads. So you might have mum, two dads, two sets of grandparents on the paternal side, plus maternal grandparents. So anybody who has been involved in bringing up that child has the opportunity of attending a MIAM if they wish to. The importance for this for us is several things. One, we need to be able to work out how we're going to actually facilitate the mediation. So what we don't do is just put all of those people that I've just mentioned in a room together and hope for the best. So we are very much screening and looking at suitability. And we may, for example, be prepared to do a MIAM with a caregiver and one of the parents, but it may not be suitable for both parents to be in the same room at the same time. So it might be that there will be multiple mediations going on. So often what we've found in the pilot scheme is that the caregiver often ends up in quite a lot of separate mediations, and they might end up in a mediation with biological parents, so mum separately to dad. They might also end up in a mediation with one of the other grandparents, so that they can build bonds about how a grandparent who doesn't have the care of that child might be able to assist them in moving forward. So there can be lots of different mediations that are all going on at the same time, but not necessarily all in the same place at the same time because of safeguarding. So once we've done all of those MIAMs, we set the date for the first meeting, and it generally tends to be caregiver plus mum tends to be the first one. That just seems to be anecdotal. There's no real reason, but we have noticed that trend. And then each set has 3 or 4 1.5 session hours and 1.5 hour sessions, sorry, of mediation with us. It's 3 sessions if there's a child con, 4 sessions without a child con. What we've found is usually the intervention is 16 to 20 weeks. We have found with the more complex family dynamics that it's gone slightly longer than 20 weeks, where there's been several children with different dads, and therefore different paternal grandparents wish to be involved, so it's taken slightly longer. Moving on. So session 1 starts in a very similar way to mediation. We do the explanation and signing of the agreement to mediate. We do ground rules, we do hopes and expectations, and we talk about the background a little bit. Now, we have to be very careful when we're talking about the background in kinship care, because nearly always there will be a trauma element, and what we do not want to do is re-traumatize. So we have to be very careful about understanding what happened without actually asking for details, so that we're not re-triggering and we're not actually causing more trauma or exacerbating the trauma that people have already gone through. So we normally start off by doing a really nice setting the scene, where we ask them to do some post-it notes. This just breaks the ice. It makes it nice for us as well, because we get to know more about the child. So we will often ask them to write down on post-it notes, everybody has different colours, some thoughts they have about the child. So whether they're happy, sad, funny, naughty, cheeky, all of those kind of things. And what is always fabulous about this exercise is they may not use exactly the same words, but they tend to use the same kind of words, and it shows that they know the child. So we start to get a little bit of mutuality there, where they can feel that that anybody in the room is talking about the same child. We do a little bit of education early on, not too much on adverse child experiences here. We tend to coach it in a way of you're here. So this is a really good time to talk about this, because you can then know what you're going to avoid moving forward. Anyone who's looked at adverse childhood experiences in any detail will realise it can be really upsetting to any parent or caregiver if they feel that they have damaged the child. So we tend to use it in a very positive experience way. We talk about how changing their own behaviour can reduce the impact of any conflict on the child. We spend some time on communication. We talk about the importance of regular meetings in neutral venues, if that's appropriate. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes we have court orders that are very clear that it's supervised contact, nothing more. So we can't go outside of that parameter for safeguarding reasons. But where we are allowed to, we will talk about how they can meet, how they can share information. And we'll come on to the halt signs that are on there in a minute, but we'll talk about halt signs as well. And then we discuss whether it is appropriate for us to meet the child or children. And as I say, this very much depends on how much the children have been involved. So if they have met, if they've had guardians and they've had social workers and they've had maybe an expert as well, then we won't. If it's been a private agreement and they haven't met anyone, then often we will see the children. We'll often see the children where they're teenagers. So they often wish to be involved much more, even if they have seen other people. So moving forward, so this is the exercise of seeing the children the same way. So once we've got them writing on their post-it notes, we also talk about how do you think those children would like to see your relationship. So this might also encourage them to write things about being kind to each other, speaking politely, saying hello. Sorry, I've gone back again. Saying hello, goodbye, being polite at the handovers, all of those kind of things. So moving forward, when we also go on to putting it all up on the flip chart, what you will have is seeing the post-it notes around the name of the child. You will see what they feel they would like the child to see as far as their relationship is concerned, and it's a really good anchor point to bring them back to make sure. And it's also really valuable to just get them to look at those words just for 60 seconds, just so that they can think about it from their point of view. You're not asking them for feedback. They don't have to comment on what the other person's view is, but just for them to think about it and to take on board what is on there. So that is very much about setting the scene and hopefully making them feel that they're talking about the same child. So moving on. So we talk about when do they talk about the children, and what we know, and we know this from usual mediation as well, is people always tend to want to talk at handovers. It's just such an awful place to do it. The child is there, everybody's rushed. Or they communicate by text or email, and we all know how notorious that is for miscommunication. So what we try and encourage where it's safe is something else. So we might say meet up in a neutral space once a month, for example. If it isn't safe for them to actually meet, then it might be by telephone or by Zoom so that they could have a conversation. And when we do ask them to meet up, we talk about the halt signs. So the halt signs are hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. So what we encourage people to do is never to have a conversation when you're any of those things. Now, naturally, when we were talking about handovers, you're nearly all of those at a handover, because for some reason, we all seem to, how many court orders have we all seen which say handover at 5 o'clock in the evening? So you hand over at dinner time. One person is then feeling lonely because they're going to leave the child. The other person is probably tired, and normally someone's late. So there's some anger in there. So what we're trying to encourage people to do is look at these halt signs and think, let's try and create the best opportunity for being successful. So, if we're not hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, when can we do this? When can we have those conversations when it's really safe to do so? So session 2 generally tends to be the child consultation, as we said. So the child consultation, we only do face-to-face. That's a decision we've made internally. It doesn't have to be, but certainly for this project, we felt very strongly that because of the trauma and the difficulties these children had faced, and because of the difficulties with this cohort of who might be in a room and therefore being able to have those safe spaces, we'd made the decision for this pilot that we would only do face-to-face. It is confidential, obviously, except for safeguarding. The same rules as far as mediation apply. We do not do notes to the parents, and we only feed back what the child gives us permission to feed back. All of the mediators are SIM qualified and have enhanced DBS checks. But the thing that we found the most valuable for this is these children have been through quite a lot, and they are much more aware of what the system has brought, and therefore they have many more views than we found in a normal child consultation. So they have much more understanding of what can and can't be done and what should or shouldn't be done. So moving on. So same as normal, specially trained mediator, talking about wishes and feelings, expectations, concerns. They do have a voice, but they don't make a decision. As we all know, this is part of the Family Mediation Council's Code of Practice that children over the age of 10 should be given a voice if they wish to have one. And it's exactly the same in this pilot. If they don't want to come, they don't have to come. So we do write to them separately. We do invite them separately. We have a little 360 video on our website so that they can see where they would go, who they would see, where they would sit, so that it's very child focused. As I say, they only attend if they have to, if they want to. Age and maturity is really important. It is with everyone's consent. So even in a situation where, for example, you might have a special guardian order, which of course means that the guardians have a higher amount of parental responsibility and therefore can approve something without the biological parent's consent, we made a decision that it has to be with everybody's consent. So moving forward.
So just picking up then, so we've done sessions 1 and 2, and then we'll just cover quickly session 3 and 4. So session 3, really looking around how to communicate. Now, I know that lots of you will touch on some of this in your mediations anyway, but I think our understanding is that we go into quite a lot of detail on some of this stuff, and that this probably wouldn't be covered by a legal aid certificate. So just adding to what Clara said earlier, this is sort of on top of your standard mediation. And often, as you'll all be aware, is the kinship carers are less likely to be eligible for legal aid. So we really felt that we really needed the funding to do this in order to take it forward. So extra bits and pieces, as I say, and this session is really around communication. So obviously they get the results of the child con fed back, and then we look at communication. We look at, it's really basic stuff, iMessages. So I wish you would, rather than you always do this, this and this, iMessages. And we do some stuff around listening, focus listening and reflecting back, which obviously is a really, really tough thing to do, especially if you're feeling very angry and upset with the other person. The last thing you want to do is listen to anything they've got to say. So, but teaching them some stuff around listening, reflecting back, iMessages, healthy communication, and then as ever, there's always needs to be plenty of time for mediation of the current issues so that they're actually feeling that they're moving forward as well. Session 4 then tends to look at healthy management of conflict. So looking at where before we've thought about communication and how we bring issues up, and a good time to discuss them, which is obviously like the sort of stepping stone, the starting point for managing conflict well. This is then looking at how we actually manage the conflict when we're talking about it. And we use something called, let's just move forward to that, the 10 steps for resolving conflict. So this is something which is based on a prepare enrich model, which we work through with the families, and we support them in using this sort of process, which you will, I won't read it out, but you will see on the screen. And then it's more of a solution focused, forward looking sort of way of dealing with conflict. And the research suggests that if you follow this method, then you are giving yourself the best possible chance of resolving an issue without unnecessary conflict, although obviously that's never guaranteed. We also talk to the parents about, or sorry, the families about the stop signs. So the stop signs are what research suggests, there's a lot of John Gottman research, suggests that these are the 4 most destructive behaviours in a relationship. So that's any type of relationship, a work relationship, a home relationship, any type of relationship. And obviously that's outside an affair or domestic abuse, but these are 4 destructive behaviour patterns. So S is scoring points, so that's you did this, yes, but you did that. T is thinking the worst, so that's taking the worst possible interpretation of the other person's actions. O is opting out, so that is, this is too painful, I'm not going there, I'm not going to discuss it, I'm just going to bury it, we're never going to cover it. But then, of course, that means that then the issue raises its ugly head later on. And that is different from the halt signs, which is I am too angry to deal with this at the moment, but I will come back and talk to you about it. Opting out is just we are never going there at all. And P is putting each other down. So putting each other down in public and putting each other down to each other's faces. So again, looking at what's happening on Facebook, what's happening on social media, to help supporting them in just noticing some of these patterns of communication. And because it's the 4th session, we try to finish off by looking at goals for the future. So it's trying to bring the carer and the parents together so that they have the same goals for the future for the children. So we ask them to look at the goals for the kids, their own goals, to have a little bit of time thinking about that for the next few years, and then to run through them with each other and answering some of the questions which you can see we've got on the slides by thinking about what's important to me, what's important to the other person, and how do they complement each other? Do the goals complement each other? How can we make these goals happen for our children? And where it's appropriate, where we can persuade everybody, how are we going to help the children reach the other person's goals? So really trying to work together to make them feel more sort of cohesive as a family. The other stuff that we do look at is some information around parenting. So again, you use your judgment as a mediator as to whether this is appropriate or not, but you might want to talk to them around parenting styles. So where parenting styles are quite different. We do show them this parenting pyramid, which we've got on the slide, which is from the Incredible Years Parenting Programme, which is really useful and looks at, if you look at the yellow part, the front of the pyramid, you can see that all the skills and strategies are listed, but the ones that you need to use most often are the ones that are listed at the bottom that are the biggest. So empathy, play, problem solving, listening, talking, and to try and support the families to avoid sort of looping around the consequences at the top and just circling around that and then avoiding all the other nice stuff, which is better for the kids. We can talk about emotional bank account, love languages, focus, praise, listening. Avoiding harsh criticism is quite useful because we have some information which we give out about the developmental stages of each child and their age. So that means that with some people or some, maybe the carer or the parent might be expecting behaviour which there's no way a 5-year-old child would behave in this particular way, but it might be suitable for a 10-year-old. So if we can help people understand the developmental stages of children, that can avoid sort of criticism. And then obviously house rules. Careful use of consequences. If a child is neurodivergent, then consequences are slightly more risky. Looking at managing anger, the anger river, which is Claire's favourite thing of all time, the adrenaline cycle, and then signposting them off where necessary. So just lots of information, but we use it as and when appropriate. We don't sort of run them through it regardless. So just quickly around the types of decisions made. Obviously, as in any mediation, discussions are based around the needs and concerns of all the participants. And really, they are talking about very similar stuff to your average mediation. So contact arrangements, concerns, any concerns anybody's got about the child, behaviour, education, medical. any extra support for the child which people think is appropriate, support for the adults, parenting and routines, goals for the kids, and any problems in implementing court orders. So that's sort of stuff that we cover, and it's really pretty similar to a standard mediation. So the outcomes that the project is hoping to achieve, if you look at the short-term outcomes on the left, some of these are some of the outcomes that are listed here. So kinship carers and parents feel confident and safe to communicate honestly during mediation. So that's a lot about working with them in the MIAM, in the individual meeting at the beginning, to make sure that we have safeguarded properly, that they're in shuttle if it's appropriate, so they're in separate rooms if it's appropriate. Just doing everything we can to make it as safe as possible for people to communicate honestly. And that can be, that's hard when they've had a lot of experience of being judged on their parenting from the local authority. Aiming for an improvement in communication outside of the mediation sessions, hoping that they will make more decisions by taking the child's view into account. So again, that's the benefit of the child consultation. Hoping that the kinship carer and the parents are better able to engage in future focused discussions and problem solving. So what doesn't matter what's happened in the past. Well, it does matter, but we're going to try and move forward. We can't forget about the past, but we're going to try and look to the future and look at what's best for the child. And hoping that they have everybody has a better understanding of parenting techniques, and in particularly the effect of ongoing conflict on the children. And then longer term outcomes, you see in the sort of orangey yellow box, is looking at reduced levels of conflict, increased cooperation, hopefully kinship carers feeling less stressed because of a reduction in conflict, more collaborative, predictable and consistent approaches, either in each home or while the parent has contact, that the kinship children feel more settled generally, they can grow up well with good outcomes, fewer go back into local authority care, and that the children have the best possible future that we can give them in terms of outcomes. So those are the hopes. Obviously, the long-term outcomes aren't being measured because we're just doing like a quorum are doing a short-term evaluation. So although those are all the aim for outcomes, what quorum are actually checking and testing for are these questions here. So quorum are doing a feasibility study, which actually is whether or not we can ever evaluate this project properly. So is it feasible even to evaluate it properly? So these are the 4 questions. To what extent is it feasible? How should it be evaluated in the future? How could it be developed, scaled up and replicated in the future? And then number 4, which is, are there any signs at all, any evidence of promise that the project is achieving the outcomes listed in the logic model, which I will tell you about in a minute. So those outcomes: reducing level of conflict, improving cooperation and communication, and increasing the understanding of the impact of ongoing conflict on children. So those are the research questions. So it is really a basic feasibility study rather than a full-blown evaluation. We haven't got time, unfortunately, to run through the logic model and the theory of change. So the logic model and the theory of change set out why we think it should make a difference, how we're going to do it, and what that could look like. So if you do want to learn more about it, there is a whole raft of information about the project. If you look up foundations and kinship care mediation, you will see all the details of the intervention and all the detail that we've talked about today. So just hand over to you, Claire.
Thank you. So we just thought we'd share a couple of the sound bites from the biological parents when they've spoken to quorum for the evaluation. I won't read them out to you, but generally the theme that has come through and has been really, really valuable to us is the feeling of being heard for the first time, of being in a safe place, of being able to speak openly and freely. And I think that was one of the things that we had really hoped for. And that was one of the things that I think when this came back, one of the mediations that didn't end up in a successful outcome, actually the feedback from both biological parents and the carer was positive, saying actually, although we couldn't quite get there on our own, the fact that we had these conversations was the first time that we'd actually addressed some of the things. And so it was really, really valuable. And I think it gets us away from that legal aid thing of mark an S if you're successful and a B if you've broken down. It was much more about what did they get out of it and what did they feel about it. So moving on. If you do
and I'm
have
just going to
someone...
say, Claire, sorry, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to say some people, obviously we were concerned about the balance of power in the mediation around that the biological parent doesn't have the same power in the situation, but actually all the feedback, as Claire just said from the evaluation, is that the biological parent felt empowered and heard, possibly for the first time. So that's just, I think that's hugely helpful. Sorry, Claire, shouldn't have interrupted.
No, not at all. It was really valuable. As Helen said, we've got a few spaces left, not very many now, less than one handful. But if anyone does have anybody, then you can still refer in, and we are still taking them from the local authority. So that brings us to the end of our formal part. We are going to take questions and answers. Helen Anthony from FMC is going to rejoin us, and I think has been looking at the questions.
Hi, yes, the questions have just started to come in. So we kick off. There's a question about what's the difference between a MIAM and a mediation. If you could just very briefly explain that for one of our...
The MIAM is a one-to-one. So it's an individual appointment where that person is completely confidential. We don't share that information with any of the other participants, sorry. And it's for us to be able to assess suitability, to double check on safeguarding, and actually for them to know whether they want to participate as well. We also do have to run through the fact that it is a pilot that is being assessed. So although everything is anonymised, they do have to give their consent to that. So it takes a little bit longer than a standard MIAM, in the fact that we've got a few other bits that we have to do to explain how it's all going to be pulled together. And the fact that they will be asked if they wish to, and it is voluntary, whether they wish to speak to quorum at the end about their experiences. Some have wanted to and some haven't, but the main thing about a MIAM is it gives them the ability to have a one-to-one conversation about what's coming next and whether they even want to do it.
Thank you. And then related to that, because obviously you talked about sort of deciding whether mediation is the right thing for that group of people, for that child's family. What do you do if one party is not suitable for mediation but the others are? So multiple parties, would you sometimes progress with mediation between some of the parties?
Yeah, we have done. So where it tends to be the biological parents who don't find it as easy to engage. So it tends to be the carers who do engage immediately. If one of the biological parents doesn't wish to engage, then we will move on. If it feels that actually we're losing the value, then we won't. So I know that sounds a little bit sort of two answers to one question, but I think it's very much, if I can just be stereotypical for a second, if dad says, no, I'm not interested because I don't want to see the child, and the court order says I can only see the child once a year and I'm just not interested, but mum says, actually, I do want to, then we would continue. If actually it's just highlighted the degree of ongoing substance abuse and it's highlighted the degree of difficulty within the family structure, we will often make a decision because we have an overwhelming obligation to do no harm, that we could be actually delving into something that we haven't got the skills for. So if we are at all worried, we will not proceed. But often it's just one person who doesn't want to.
And Claire, you've had a lot of success, haven't you? There was one case you've got where the grandparents from different sides, paternal and maternal grandparents, they both were fighting to have the SGO, the special guardianship order themselves. And so one of them won and one of them didn't. And then so you did a lot of work with them under the project, didn't you, to bring them together? And that was hugely successful.
And for them,
so it varies.
They'd never spoken. So they'd only seen the documents through social services view. And so they had a whole different view to when they actually did the mediation and started talking to each other. And they will actually probably be the best support for each other going forward. It was that was one of the nicest ones.
So that was after court proceedings had taken
Yeah,
place.
so the court proceedings had gone through, the child had been removed from mum and dad, and one particular set of grandparents, both had been put forward, but one was chosen over and above. So you had that natural feeling of one feeling that they hadn't been successful, one feeling that they had won. And also, of course, it's really difficult because often the parents, in this case, in that case that Helen's just talked about, they weren't in a secure relationship. So the grandparents didn't know each other beforehand. So actually, there's no commonality there beforehand. They've been in this situation with care proceedings. They then find out who the child is going to live with, and then they've got to say, well, I'd quite like to still see my grandchild, can I come and see you? And they have no relationship with that set of grandparents. So it was very much just about building those alliances and actually finding out that actually they were really similar in the way they parented. So you know, I have no doubt that that child hugely benefited from having those both sets of grandparents now permanently in their life.
Thank you. The next questions we've got about involving children, and consulting children. First of all, do you have to be trained in child inclusive mediation? You're making sure that all the mediators are speaking to the children are trained in CIM.
We would say absolutely. I think some people have different views about therapeutic people becoming involved in things like that, and I wouldn't want to comment on that. But from a mediation point of view and an FMC point of view, yes, you have to be SIM trained, you have to have an enhanced DBS check, and we wouldn't want to do it any other way.
So SIM trained is child inclusive mediation trained.
Sorry.
Just for, yeah, because it's all jargon, isn't it? We're all jargon.
Thank you. And then related to that, you were talking about session 4 and goal setting. So how are the children's views, if you've consulted the child, how are the children's views fed into the goal setting that you mentioned in session 4?
Oh, so we might be say the child in the child con said, look, I really don't care who takes me to football as long as somebody does. Then we might be sort of incorporating that in session 4. So we might say, so you know, one of the goals you might want to think about would be how to pursue little Johnny's football career that he's desperate for, and that might be, you might think how we can do that over the next year, how might that be over the next 5 years, and how are we going to work that in to a plan so it just benefits the child. So it's really thinking about what they said in the child con and then how we can incorporate that sort of going forward, but also thinking quite a lot about trying to follow where appropriate the child's wishes and feelings in all other areas as well. So talking about how often they see their biological parent, but always within the limitations of what the local authority want and what the court wants. I hope that sort of answers that.
So it's the safety, but it's also parents and carers forget. So they often, using Helen's example of the football, they'll think, well, we can all turn up, but they're not going to stand together. So we talk about how that might feel to the child. So it's just pulling them a little bit more and making them just take one more step in the child's shoes to look at it from a child-focused point of view.
Okay, thank you. We're getting to the end of our time, so I'm just going to add a question of my own to finish off with. Obviously, we've been talking about a very specific sort of grant-funded project that you've been doing. There's a lot of interest in the project, in the questions. There's interest in how mediators could be more specifically trained on kinship care and how it might go forward. So, what are your hopes for the future for this particular area of work?
I really hope that the feasibility study shows that it can go to the next stage, which the next stage would be a much bigger pilot. So, and then hopefully we would be looking at for mediators to volunteer, because we would need to do it more nationally. So we would have to look at more local authorities rather than the ones just near us who are very used to me. So we would be looking at that, and then we would be looking at giving training on the extra things that we've gone through so that people could then do the mediation that we've talked about and be then evaluated probably by quorum to see if then we could even go even further, that this should be actually not a pilot anymore.
A national sort of project. Yeah.
And actually just be normal.
Yeah.
It's great. Thank you. And that's a great note to end on. Thank you to everybody who has joined the webinar today. Thank you very much to Helen and to Claire for presenting. We have questions about whether this is going to be available afterwards. We will make it available online, so please do look back and share with your colleagues. I'm sorry if we haven't had a chance to answer all your questions, but do get in touch with us at the Family Mediation Council if you want to follow up. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.